The dream of equality, once etched into revolutions and whispered in the streets of old republics, has now been quietly buried beneath the weight of steel, surveillance, and silent obedience. In this chapter, Orwell reveals not only how power is maintained, but why. Through a cold, calculated architecture of betrayal and illusion, we come to understand how history can be frozen, how rebellion can be preempted, and how the human spirit itself is manipulated. But what happens when truth is no longer shared and freedom becomes a forgotten word? In the mid-20th century, a significant ideological shift took place in the world's political landscape. Once birthed from the hope of human equality and freedom, socialism, rooted in the historical dreams of ancient slave revolts and the utopian aspirations of past centuries, gradually relinquished these ideals. After 1900, emerging forms of socialism no longer aimed to deliver liberty and equality, but instead evolved into tools of control and hierarchy. New regimes like Ingsoc in Oceania, neo-Bolshevism in Eurasia, and death worship in East Asia emerged. Though they retained the rhetoric of earlier movements, their true purpose was to halt history, trap progress in a static moment, and ensure that the high, those in power, would never again be overthrown by the middle. This transformation stemmed in part from a heightened awareness of historical patterns. As the rhythm of history became clearer, leaders realized it could be manipulated. Additionally, by the early 20th century, technological advancement made real equality possible for the first time. Despite inherent differences in talent and ability, there was no longer a practical need for massive wealth disparities or rigid class divisions. Yet for those on the verge of seizing power, this newfound possibility of equality was a threat, not an opportunity. Instead of striving toward a more just society, the ruling group sought to preserve inequality permanently. Historically, inequality had seemed necessary, even beneficial. Civilizations were built on it. But with the rise of machine-based production, the justification dissolved. Still, the ruling elite rejected the dream of brotherhood and justice that had persisted through revolutions in France, America, and elsewhere. By the 1930s, authoritarianism prevailed. Acts once deemed barbaric, public executions, torture, slavery, and mass deportation became normalized, even championed by self-proclaimed progressives. The hope for a utopia vanished just as it became feasible. Through decades of upheaval, wars, revolutions, and societal collapses, the totalitarian states of the mid-century crystallized. These states were born from the chaos and modeled on the early totalitarian systems that had preceded them. The new ruling class consisted not of kings or capitalists, but of bureaucrats, scientists, teachers, technicians, sociologists, and political strategists. They were molded by centralized governments and monopolistic industries. Unlike their historical counterparts, they craved not luxury but pure power and were methodical, deliberate, and merciless in securing it. This generation of rulers diverged sharply from past tyrants. Where old empires allowed space for dissent and failed to monitor thought, modern technology offered total control. Print, film, and radio had already begun to shape opinion, but with television, especially two-way telescreens, privacy was annihilated. The government could now observe and indoctrinate every significant citizen continuously, ensuring obedience and ideological uniformity. As power solidified, the traditional class divisions re-emerged in altered form: the high, the middle, and the low. However, this time the high class, the inner party, was aware of what must be done to preserve its dominance. Collectivism became the ideological bedrock of the oligarchy. By abolishing private property and concentrating ownership into the hands of the party, wealth was more tightly controlled than ever before. While individuals held no real property, the party collectively owned everything. This illusion of collectivization allowed the party to tighten its grip with minimal resistance. This apparent realization of socialist aims, the seizure of factories, transport, land, led many to believe socialism had arrived. But the outcome was the opposite of equality. Economic disparity was entrenched deliberately. The party ensured its own longevity by focusing not on material wealth, but on maintaining power. History showed four main ways a ruling group could fall: conquest, mass revolt, the rise of a rival middle class, or the decay of its own will to govern. Ingsoc neutralized all four. External conquest was impossible. Each superstate was unconquerable. Mass rebellion was improbable. The people were kept ignorant, lacking comparison points or awareness of oppression. Even economic crises were managed, and overproduction was controlled through endless war. The true threat lay in intellectual subversion from within the party and the potential rise of a new, ambitious middle class. Thus, education became the central focus, not to enlighten, but to condition. The minds of the elite were sculpted to ensure loyalty, while the masses were dulled, needing only passive indoctrination. Against this backdrop stood Big Brother, the omnipresent symbol of the party. He was not merely a leader, but a persona designed to elicit love, fear, and reverence. No one had ever seen him. He existed as a face and a voice, immortal and mysterious. Beneath him operated the inner party, about 2% of the population, the outer party, the hands of the regime, and the proles, the voiceless 85%. Despite this stratification, the party avoided being classified as a hereditary class. Children were not guaranteed positions based on their parents' status. Theoretically, party membership was merit-based, determined by examinations at 16. Racial or regional biases were minimized. People of any origin could ascend, as long as they aligned ideologically. In practice, however, social mobility was rare. The barrier between party members and proles was almost impermeable. Potentially subversive individuals were eliminated by the thought police. While there was some movement between the inner and outer party to ensure control and neutralize ambition, proles remained excluded. Still, the party remained flexible in principle, willing to recruit new elites from the masses if necessary to preserve its structure. Early socialist thinkers failed to understand this adaptability. They believed non-hereditary power could not be permanent. Yet history showed that longevity lies not in bloodlines, but in ideology. Institutions like the Catholic Church had endured for centuries through spiritual succession. The party's power rested not on family lineage, but on the unbroken transmission of its worldview. So long as the party could select and shape its successors, it would remain eternal. It did not aim to perpetuate its members, it aimed to perpetuate itself. The individual was irrelevant. What mattered was the maintenance of the system. In this world, the face of power could change, but the structure would not. The passage opens with a sobering insight into the fate of socialist ideology. Once a symbol of resistance and equality, now a vessel for control. It introduces socialism not simply as a political tool, but as the final echo of a long historical yearning, stretching back to ancient slave rebellions. That it was still deeply infected by the utopianism of past ages suggests a bittersweet irony. Ideals that once inspired liberation were being twisted into new mechanisms of domination. This is not just a historical commentary, it is a meditation on how even the noblest dreams can decay when subjected to the temptations of power. As the text unfolds, we witness the gradual abandonment of liberty and equality by newer political movements. Ingsoc in Oceania, neo-Bolshevism in Eurasia, and death worship in East Asia all claim ideological lineage from past revolutions, but their true aim is the consolidation of power through inequality. The purpose of all of them was to arrest progress and freeze history at a chosen moment. This chilling line reflects the central paradox of power. While revolutions promise change, those who succeed in seizing control often strive to halt history the moment they secure dominance. It is a timeless dynamic. Those who once fought oppression become its architects. The pendulum swing of history is not merely political, It is deeply psychological, echoing the human fear of uncertainty and the longing to preserve a moment of triumph indefinitely. The passage also challenges the reader with a profound observation. By the 20th century, equality was no longer an abstract dream. It was technologically possible. With the rise of machine production, the economic distinctions that once justified class divisions began to erode. Even if it was still necessary for human beings to do different kinds of work, it was no longer necessary for them to live at different social or economic levels. This statement underscores a tragic opportunity missed. Instead of building a more equitable world, the ruling groups redefined equality as a threat. The betrayal was not of principle alone, but of potential. This shift reveals a deep moral failure. When offered the chance to transcend ancient hierarchies, those in power chose instead to manipulate the emerging tools of technology and ideology to strengthen their grip. The vision of a just society, a brotherhood without laws and without brute labor, had inspired generations. But when its realization finally became feasible, it was swiftly discredited. The earthly paradise was no longer unattainable, it was inconvenient. The regression that followed is one of the most unsettling elements of the chapter. Practices long thought barbaric, torture, slavery, public executions, and mass deportations, return not as desperate responses to chaos, but as conscious policies. Even more disturbing, they were tolerated and even defended by individuals who consider themselves progressive. It is a painful reminder that civilization's veneer is thin. Under certain pressures, even those who pride themselves on enlightenment can become apologists for cruelty, provided it serves the illusion of order. As the dust of revolution settled, a new ruling class emerged, not born of aristocracy or wealth, but molded by bureaucracy, science, and ideology. Composed of bureaucrats, scientists, technicians, sociologists, teachers, journalists, and professional politicians, these individuals were products of a sterile and controlled system. Their motivation was not luxury or leisure, but the pursuit of pure power, refined, systematic, and total. Unlike previous tyrants and who'd often ruled erratically or left room for dissent, this new elite understood power as a science. They were determined not simply to lead, but to erase resistance before it could form. At the heart of their strategy was surveillance. In previous eras, total control had been impossible due to technical limitations. The invention of the printing press, film, and radio had already begun the process of shaping public opinion, but the arrival of television, especially its two-way variant, eliminated privacy altogether. Now every citizen could be watched and heard in real time. The idea of private life ceased to exist. Complete uniformity of opinion on all subjects now existed for the first time. This development did not only destroy individuality, it redefined reality. In such a world, truth became whatever the ruling party declared it to be. The next layer of insight explores the false promise of collectivism. Following the so-called abolition of private property, the party centralized ownership into its own hands. Individually, no member of the party owns anything. Collectively, the party owns everything. What appeared on the surface to be socialist reform was in truth a rebranding of authoritarianism. The masses were told they had triumphed over capitalism, but in reality, control had simply shifted from many hands to one invisible fist. The lesson here is sobering. Language can be twisted to make slavery sound like freedom, and oppression like progress. Equally thought-provoking is the discussion of the 4 ways a ruling group might fall: conquest, inefficient governance, the rise of a rival middle group, or loss of confidence. The dystopia described in the text has neutralized all 4. External conquest is impossible due to the geopolitical structure. The masses are too ignorant and disempowered to revolt. Potential threats from within are managed through careful ideological grooming, and any spark of liberalism is extinguished through systemic indoctrination. The party's secret lies in its ability to educate, not to enlighten, but to mold. It does not need the masses to think critically. It only needs them to feel fear, loyalty, and dependence. This inversion of education, from liberation to containment, is one of the most chilling insights of the passage. It asks the reader to reconsider the role of knowledge in society. Does it free us? Or can it be used to make chains feel like gifts? Perhaps the most emblematic figure in the text is Big Brother. He is never seen, never touched, only heard and revered. He exists as a face on the hoardings, a voice on the telescreen. His function is not governance, but embodiment. He focuses collective emotion, channels love and fear into a single, untouchable figure. In doing so, he allows the party to remain abstract and unaccountable. This phenomenon is not confined to fiction. In history and in life, symbols often become more powerful than people. And when power becomes personified, it escapes scrutiny. Beneath Big Brother lies a rigid class structure. The inner party, the brain, the outer party, the hands, and the proles, the forgotten majority. While membership is theoretically based on merit, upward movement is practically impossible. Those from the proles who show promise are eliminated. Only enough interchange exists between party branches to neutralize ambition and ensure conformity. This is not a meritocracy. It is a system designed to appear flexible while ensuring that true power remains locked in place. Yet the party is not a class in the traditional sense. It does not pass down power through bloodlines. Instead, it preserves itself through ideology. A ruling group is a ruling group so long as it can nominate its successors. This insight challenges conventional notions of aristocracy. What makes a regime permanent is not lineage, but the transmission of worldview. In this way, the party functions more like a religious order than a government. Like the Catholic Church, it survives by shaping minds, not by controlling lands. This leads to one of the most haunting conclusions of the passage. The most enduring power is not physical, but mental. It is the ability to shape how people see the world, and most chillingly, how they see themselves. The party is not interested in who holds the reins, only that the structure remains. In such a system, the individual is irrelevant. Only obedience matters. Taken as a whole, this passage is more than political commentary. It is a reflection on the human condition. It shows how ideals can be corrupted, how language can deceive, and how systems can mutate into monsters when left unchecked. It is a warning, but not without hope. It teaches that freedom, justice, and truth are never guaranteed. They must be chosen, protected, and reclaimed again and again with courage, vigilance, and integrity. The reader is left with a sobering understanding. Tyranny does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives dressed in the language of progress, smiling behind the mask of reform. Its power lies in subtlety, in repetition, in the gradual erosion of what? In this chapter, the narrative exposes the inner mechanics of how totalitarian power is sustained through psychological control rather than mere physical force. At its core lies the party's desire to shape not only the external actions, but also the inner consciousness of its members. All beliefs, instincts, and emotions permitted in oceanic society are intentionally designed to preserve the mystique of the party and veil the true structure of the world from the public eye. Among the general population, the proles, no rebellion is feared, as they are kept in a state of ignorance, incapable of imagining a different existence. Their education is intentionally limited, and since military and economic competition no longer drive innovation, even that limited education is in decline. Intellectual liberty is granted to them not out of generosity, but because they lack the intellectual capacity to use it. In contrast, party members are held to an exacting standard of ideological purity. From birth to death, the party member lives under the constant scrutiny of the thought police. Even in solitude, he cannot be certain of being alone. His expressions, gestures, relationships, and even subconscious behaviors are subject to inspection. Nothing is too small to be judged. An unusual twitch, an awkward silence, or an involuntary sigh may betray disloyalty. In this world, there are no formal laws. Rather, individuals are vaporized not for crimes committed, but for the potential to commit them. Orthodoxy is not just a set of opinions, but a pattern of instinctive reactions. Many of these required responses are never explicitly articulated, as doing so would reveal the contradictions at the heart of things. Those who are naturally orthodox, called good thinkers in Newspeak, intuitively react in ways the party approves without needing to reason or question. From early childhood, citizens are trained in thought-disciplining techniques that revolve around key Newspeak concepts: crime stop, black-white, and doublethink. Crime stop is the ability to instinctively stop any thought that might be dangerous or heretical. It involves the refusal to see analogies, misunderstand arguments hostile to the party, and become emotionally repelled by even the potential of dissent. It is a kind of protective stupidity, a safeguard against intellectual curiosity. Yet stupidity alone is insufficient. True orthodoxy requires the mental dexterity of doublethink, the power to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and accept both as true. This ability enables party members to lie to themselves and to others with complete sincerity. Black-white complements this, allowing the faithful to claim and believe that black is white, not just when convenient, but with full conviction, and to forget they ever believed otherwise. This flexible perception of truth enables history itself to be manipulated continuously. The past is altered not only to fit the party's needs, but also to ensure its absolute infallibility. The rewriting of history serves two purposes. First, it denies citizens any standard of comparison, preventing them from realizing they might be worse off than previous generations. Second, and more crucially, it protects the party's aura of perfection. If the party claims that a nation has always been the enemy, then history must reflect that narrative, regardless of the facts. The Ministry of Truth tirelessly falsifies records to ensure that the party is never wrong. Yet this manipulation goes beyond paperwork. It requires citizens to adjust their memories and even forget that they ever remembered otherwise. Doublethink trains them to both know and unknow simultaneously, erasing any contradiction before it becomes problematic. The doctrine that the past is alterable becomes a central tenet of Ingsoc. Since all memories and records are controlled by the party, the past becomes a construct, shaped and reshaped endlessly. Once a past event is rewritten, the new version becomes the only version that has ever existed. This manipulation is not accidental or superficial. It is deeply systematic. The goal is not merely obedience, but internalized belief in the party's ever-changing version of reality. Even the act of rewriting is erased from memory through doublethink, allowing the lie to stay one step ahead of the truth at all times. This level of control ensures that party members cannot rebel because they cannot fully perceive their oppression. The system prevents clarity, making it impossible to hold a consistent view of reality. War, for instance, is most fervently supported by those who understand it least. Among the inner party, war hysteria is most intense, not because they are deceived, but because they have trained themselves to believe what they know to be false. Meanwhile, those most affected by the war, the people in the disputed territories, are indifferent, understanding that their suffering is constant regardless of who rules them. Ingsoc thrives on contradiction. The party attacks and ridicules every principle the original socialist movement upheld, even as it claims to speak in socialism's name. It dismantles the family but calls its leader Big Brother. Its ministries are openly ironic. The Ministry of Peace wages war. The Ministry of Love conducts torture. The Ministry of Truth spreads lies. And the Ministry of Plenty manages scarcity and starvation. These are not merely hypocrisies. They are carefully engineered paradoxes maintained through doublethink. Through this intellectual gymnastics, the party achieves what no prior regime has managed: the ability to rule indefinitely by maintaining controlled insanity. Previous oligarchies collapsed because they either became rigid and blind or too lenient and soft. The party, however, has created a system where both clarity and delusion coexist. It can adjust to changing conditions while remaining ideologically rigid. This balance is made possible only by doublethink, a system in which self-deception is perfected into a political necessity. The most unsettling revelation, however, comes at the end of the chapter. After all this explanation, the central question remains unanswered. Why? Why does the party go to such lengths to suppress equality and control truth? Winston, lying beside the sleeping Julia, realizes that the book he has just read has clarified the how but not the why. The motive behind this colossal manipulation remains elusive. He feels reassured that he is not insane, that truth exists independently of acceptance, and that clinging to it, no matter how solitary the act, is a form of resistance. As he falls asleep, the words echo in his mind: sanity is not statistical. In that quiet thought lies a seed of hope, however fragile, that reality can still be reclaimed. In this passage from 1984, George Orwell lays bare the intellectual and emotional scaffolding upon which totalitarian power sustains itself. The tone is analytical yet charged with quiet despair, as Orwell's narrative voice dissects the psychological engineering of a society built not just on repression, but on cognitive manipulation so complete that even reality itself becomes elastic. The central message, however, is not one of hopelessness, but of insight. That clarity, even in isolation, is resistance. The section begins with a brutal truth. All the beliefs, habits, tastes, emotions, mental attitudes that characterize our time are really designed to sustain the mystique of the party and prevent the true nature of present-day society from being perceived. Orwell is not only describing a dystopia, he is revealing a world where every facet of human behavior is molded to protect a ruling ideology. The idea that rebellion is not only forbidden, but inconceivable for the proletariat speaks volumes about the psychological barriers constructed to guard the regime. This theme deepens as the narrator compares the relative freedom of the proles with the suffocating vigilance imposed on party members. A party member lives from birth to death under the eye of the thought police. The omnipresence of surveillance obliterates the boundary between public and private, between thought and crime. In Orwell's rendering, even solitude is not a refuge. One is never alone. The consequences are chilling. Every facial expression, every muscle twitch, every unconscious word muttered in sleep becomes a potential act of treason. Here, Orwell introduces a terrifying paradox. There are no formal laws, yet punishment is absolute. In Oceania, there is no law. Instead of legal codes, there is an unspoken doctrine that adapts and shifts, ensuring that everyone is guilty by default, and innocence is impossible. This speaks to a world where intent is meaningless because interpretation belongs exclusively to the ruling class. Through concepts like crime stop, black, white, and doublethink, Orwell shows how the mind is not merely oppressed, but reshaped. Crime stop, the reflex to shut down any dangerous thought, is taught from childhood. It's a kind of mental gag reflex, a self-censorship so automatic that dissent becomes psychologically impossible. The narrator explains, crime stop, in short, means protective stupidity. But Orwell is not accusing the individual of weakness. He's illustrating the power of conditioning. Black-white, another Newspeak term, reveals the double-edged nature of submission, to deny truth and simultaneously to believe in the denial. It means also the ability to believe that black is white, and more, to know that black is white. This encapsulates the internalization of falsehood, not just saying what one is told to say, but genuinely believing it, and forgetting one ever believed otherwise. This leads into doublethink, the central mechanism of ideological control. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. It is a self-induced cognitive dissonance, mastered by those in power and taught to everyone else. The narrative explains that the goal is not just obedience, but mental pliability. Memory itself must be malleable, facts must be alterable, and truth must be fluid. The party's manipulation of the past is not mere propaganda. It's epistemological warfare. The past is whatever the party chooses to make it. By controlling memory, the party controls identity. By rewriting history, they rewrite the collective soul. This raises one of Orwell's most enduring questions. What is reality if every record of it is under control? In 1984, reality becomes a construct dictated by those in power. In a particularly haunting passage, the narrator reflects, even in using the word doublethink, it is necessary to exercise doublethink. Here, Orwell reveals the inescapable spiral of self-deception required to function within the system. The lie is always one step ahead of the truth. It is a game rigged not only from the outside, but from within. As the passage continues, Orwell traces how the party combines traits that, historically, would have led to a regime's downfall. Where past oligarchies became rigid or soft and fell, the party has engineered a system where both conditions, rigidity and flexibility, coexist. If one is to rule and to continue ruling, one must be able to dislocate the sense of reality. Thus, the party's genius lies in its creation of a mental environment where contradiction is not only tolerated but required. It is through contradiction that their power becomes unassailable. He notes, in general, the greater the understanding, the greater the delusion. The more intelligent, the less sane. Intelligence, rather than being a tool for liberation, becomes a mechanism of entrapment. The inner party, who most understand the machinery of the lie, are also those most adept at reinforcing it. It is a chilling inversion of Enlightenment ideals. The later portions of the passage explore how war is perceived differently depending on one's proximity to power. For the elite, war is a galvanizing myth. For the masses, it is an irrelevant calamity. World conquest is believed in most firmly by those who know it to be impossible. But again, the union of belief and disbelief, of knowledge and ignorance, is the engine that drives this dystopia. Orwell's commentary on the language of power is especially sharp in his description of the ministries. The ministry of peace concerns itself with war, the ministry of truth with lies, the ministry of love with torture, and the ministry of plenty with starvation. This deliberate inversion is not satire, it is a mechanism of psychological control. It normalizes contradiction, desensitizes the citizen, and further entrenches the need for doublethink. In the final lines, as Winston closes the forbidden book and watches Julia sleep, he realizes something profound. Though he hasn't uncovered the ultimate why, he now sees the how clearly. And in that clarity, there is sanity. Sanity is not statistical, he whispers to himself. This line becomes the moral compass of the entire novel. It asserts that truth is not determined by consensus. Even if the entire world believes a lie, the individual who sees the truth is not mad. When Winston awoke, he felt as though he had slept deeply for hours, yet the clock revealed it was only 20:30. He lingered in a dreamy haze, the ordinary world seeping back as the sounds of the outside intruded. A woman's robust voice rose from the yard below, singing a familiar, sentimental tune. A song that had endured even beyond the hate song, now woven into the fabric of daily life. Julia, roused by the singing, stretched with the languid ease of someone comfortable in another's presence, then declared her hunger and the need to make more coffee. But the small domestic rituals had been interrupted. The stove had gone cold, and there was no oil left. Even as Winston and Julia prepared to dress and face these small inconveniences, The mood was tranquil, filled with a rare sense of normalcy and fleeting domestic comfort. The song below continued, its refrain echoing through the evening, mingling with the fresh, post-rain air. As Winston moved to the window, the fading light cast a washed blue sky over the wet flagstones. The woman in the yard seemed tireless, marching back and forth with laundry, her body large and sturdy, hardened by years of labor. She sang and worked, unself-conscious and powerful. A figure both ordinary and, to Winston in that moment, oddly beautiful. It struck him for the first time that beauty could exist in such a form, not in the fragile flower of youth, but in the rough solidity of survival. He compared the robust woman to Julia, youthful, supple, but forever unable to bear children in this world. Only through whispered words and forbidden glances could they hope to pass on any legacy. Their reverie was shattered by a sudden, mechanical voice, a cold, iron command that froze them in place. The voice announced, "You are the dead." The realization dawned chillingly that the telescreen had always been there, hidden behind the painting. The trap had been set long before, and now as the painting fell to reveal the screen, there was no illusion of escape. The voice demanded obedience. They were told to stand back to back, hands behind their heads, not touching. Fear made their bodies shake uncontrollably, and outside, the tramp of boots and shouts signaled the arrival of the authorities. The woman's song ceased abruptly, replaced by the chaos of the intrusion. As the house was surrounded and the familiar rhyme of, "Here comes a candle to light you to bed, here comes a chopper to chop off your head," was eerily recited by a voice Winston almost recognized. The couple's fate became undeniable. The men burst in, their black uniforms and iron-shod boots bringing violence into the small room. The sense of exposure was acute. Winston felt vulnerable, hands behind his head, with nothing between him and the brutality of the regime. The invaders seemed methodical, almost bored. One, with a prizefighter's face, paused to consider Winston, tongue flicking across his lips. There was a crash as the glass paperweight, Winston's cherished symbol of another softer world, was smashed to pieces. The delicate coral inside, once a metaphor for hope and beauty, now appeared pitifully small and insignificant as it rolled across the mat. The violence escalated. Julia was struck in the solar plexus, collapsing and gasping on the floor, her body racked by pain as the men showed no restraint. Winston, paralyzed by terror and obedience, could only observe in agony as she was lifted like a sack and carried away, her face twisted in pain, the rouge on her cheeks a last, surreal remnant of her humanity. That fleeting upside-down glimpse of Julia was to be Winston's final memory of her as a person. Alone, Winston stood motionless, not yet harmed, but utterly at the mercy of his captors. His mind, almost detached, flitted through trivial thoughts. Had they caught Mr. Charrington, the supposed ally who had provided the secret room? What of the singing woman? What fate had befallen her in the chaos? Bodily needs and stray observations intruded, odd in their normalcy amidst the disaster. He wanted to urinate, he noted the time on the mantelpiece clock. He puzzled over whether the evening light matched the hour, questioning if he and Julia had misread the time in their stolen hours together. The magnitude of betrayal became clear as Mr. Charrington entered, transformed from kindly old shopkeeper into an agent of the thought police. His voice, once so benign, was now cold and official. The mask had dropped, and Winston saw the reality. Their haven had never been safe. The illusion of privacy, the fragile beauty of the paperweight, and the stolen moments of love, all were obliterated in an instant. The couple's efforts to create meaning, to preserve their own truth against the party's lies, were crushed by the weight of a system designed to root out and destroy even the thought of rebellion. In this chapter, the narrative swings from fleeting peace to utter desolation with masterful pacing. Winston's observations of the woman in the yard and his revelation about beauty and endurance stand as a poignant counterpoint to the brutality that follows. The ordinary, the song, the chores, the soft blue sky, contrast sharply with the violence of the arrest, highlighting the relentless invasion of the party into the most private and human aspects of life. The loss of the glass paperweight symbolizes more than just the destruction of a physical object. It is the shattering of Winston's dream of a different reality, his hope that something delicate could survive in a world of iron and surveillance. The tenderness he felt with Julia, the sense that some vestige of the past could be preserved, dissolves as surely as the coral vanishes into dust. Yet even in defeat, Winston's thoughts remain, if only for a moment, his own. His final mundane reflections on bodily needs, the passage of time, and the trivial details of the world are acts of resistance in themselves. The party may control the body, but the flicker of consciousness, the capacity to notice, to feel, to mourn, is not so easily extinguished. The chapter closes not with hope, but with the stark recognition of defeat, the iron voice of the telescreen, the black uniforms of the thought police, the betrayal of Mr. Charrington. These are the instruments of a world where intimacy is a crime and trust is always a prelude to betrayal. Winston's journey, once driven by love and memory, now stands at the edge of erasure. The finality is crushing, but within it lingers a quiet, mournful acknowledgement of what was lost, and perhaps what was worth losing. In this poignant and emotionally layered chapter of 1984, Orwell paints a tender yet tragic portrait of two individuals clinging to love and meaning in a world designed to crush both. Winston wakes with the illusion of time, believing he has slept deeply, only to discover the hour is early, the light still strong, and the world outside unchanged. The moment is deceptively ordinary. The same sentimental song echoes from below, a melody too foolish for propaganda, yet too persistent to disappear. It was only an opeless fancy. It passed like an April dye. The song is neither clever nor revolutionary, but it endures. Its endurance is itself resistance. In a regime that rewrites history and strangles emotion, even a drivel-filled tune about lost love becomes a relic of human truth. Winston and Julia share this private moment with idle conversation about coffee, the stove, and the cold creeping into their room. Small concerns that mark the rare luxury of their togetherness. These details seem mundane, but Orwell positions them with care. In a society that outlaws intimacy, to speak freely about hunger, to complain about a lack of oil, to stretch and move without fear, these are precious acts. Every trivial exchange is layered with silent defiance. Outside, the woman continues her work, hanging diapers, singing, moving with the rhythm of life. Her body is weathered, large, and unglamorous. Yet Winston sees her and murmurs, "She's beautiful." This too is an awakening. He sees beauty not in the fragile ideal of youth, but in the durability of survival. Her body, hardened and rough, becomes a symbol of something the party cannot understand. Strength born of living, not dictated by ideology. Julia scoffs gently, noting the woman's broad hips, but Winston replies with quiet reverence. That is her style of beauty. Orwell, through Winston, redefines what it means to admire. The woman, a likely grandmother, is part of the proles, those deemed insignificant by the party. Yet here she stands with her song and her laundry, embodying a life fuller than the sterile doctrines that govern the world above her. She does not lead revolutions, she lives. And that, Orwell implies, is enough to be dangerous. Winston and Julia hold each other. Their connection is real, but in the cruel calculus of their world, it is also futile. No child will come from their union. No future will bear their names. They can only pass meaning from mind to mind, as Winston reflects. It is a fragile legacy, one rooted in memory, language, and shared emotion. But even this, as they soon discover, is too much for the regime to tolerate. Then comes the rupture. "You are the dead," says the iron voice, calm and inevitable. The words cut not just through the room, but through the illusion they had built together. Julia's breathless realization, it was behind the picture, confirms what readers have suspected. Their safe haven was a trap. The pastoral painting, the coral paperweight, the soft bed, and all were surrounded by invisible wires. As the painting crashes to the floor, revealing the telescreen behind it, Orwell shows the terrifying truth. In Oceania, nothing is sacred, not beauty, not art, not memory, art. The voice demands compliance, stand back to back, hands behind heads, and they obey, not out of cowardice, but because resistance has been rendered unthinkable. Orwell's message is chilling. A regime doesn't need to enforce every rule with violence when it has already taught you not to move. What follows is a ceremonial dehumanization. The black-clad men crash through windows and doors, not just to arrest, but to erase. The image of a man holding a truncheon, licking his lips where they should have been, leans into the grotesque. Winston, exposed, feels a nakedness not just of body, but of spirit. "To keep still," he repeats internally, his only remaining form of control. And then, the most symbolic violence of all, the glass paperweight smashed to dust. That tiny coral piece, once nestled safely in its dome, represented a forgotten world, delicate, innocent, untouched by propaganda. As it shatters, Winston observes how small it always was. The tragedy isn't only that it's broken, but that it was never as powerful as he hoped. It was fragile hope in a system that devours fragility. Julia is struck violently, collapsed by a blow to the solar plexus. Winston watches in terror, paralyzed. Her pain becomes his, her breathlessness, a mirror of the spiritual suffocation they now face. Orwell does not describe this violence to shock, but to illustrate how methodical dehumanization functions. Julia, once a lover, is reduced to an object carried out like a sack, upside down, face contorted, rouge still on her cheeks, a last tragic trace of her individuality. Left alone, Winston does not think of escape. He does not scream. He notices instead the need to urinate, the time on the mantle clock, the strength of the evening light. These thoughts are not absurd. They are the final shelter of a mind overwhelmed. When all else is lost, the body becomes the last refuge. He wonders if they have caught Mr. Charrington. He wonders what became of the singing woman. These passing reflections are not distractions, but echoes of meaning trying to survive. Orwell lets us see how, even in the collapse of agency, the human mind resists extinction through noticing. In a society where thoughts are crimes, noticing is an act of rebellion. What emerges from this chapter is a layered meditation on control, not merely political control, but psychological domination. Orwell does not scream his warnings, he whispers them. In the softness of memory, in the texture of red skin weathered by time, in the tune hummed by a stranger, lies the battle between life and its erasure. The lessons from this passage are manifold, but one of the most poignant is that love, though beautiful, is insufficient when the entire system is designed to dismantle it. Julia and Winston's bond was authentic, but authenticity is not armor. The party does not kill with fire, it kills with silence, with repetition, with surveillance so complete that even your heartbeat might betray you. Yet Orwell does not write only to condemn. He writes to remind us what must be protected. The singing woman, the coral paperweight, the rose-hip body, the moment of calling someone beautiful when no one else would. All these are acts of resistance. They are reminders that even when freedom is absent, meaning can still be made. And where meaning exists, so too does humanity. Orwell invites readers across time to ask, what small fragment of coral are we protecting? What song do we still sing quietly when no one listens? And most of all, are we aware of the telescreens in our lives? The subtle, persistent forces that ask us not to feel too deeply, not to remember too clearly, not to hope too much. In the end, Winston's stillness is not just fear, it is a mirror. A mirror held up to every reader who must now decide what to notice, what to value, and whether silence is safety or surrender. As Winston stands alone in the wreckage of his sanctuary, the silence in the room becomes deafening. Not just the absence of sound, but the hollow where intimacy once lived. The scent of Julia still lingers faintly in the air, and the impression of her weight beside him seems pressed into the bed, now broken. Yet all of it, like the coral paperweight, has been reduced to memory. Orwell does not rush this quiet. He lets the reader sit inside it, inside the stillness after violation, and feel the echo of what was lost. It is a silence that is not peace, but the breathless pause after a storm, where nothing is certain except that something irreversible has taken place. What Orwell captures so subtly here is the death of illusion. Not just the illusion of safety or love, but the illusion that goodness can go unnoticed forever. Winston and Julia never expected to win against the party, but somewhere in their hearts, they had clung to the idea that their private rebellion, quiet, intimate, deeply human, might be too small to be crushed. That their love, being personal, might be beneath the regime's notice. Yet the telescreen was always there, watching, recording, waiting. In this realization lies Orwell's most devastating truth. In a world like Oceania, nothing is too small to be controlled. And still, Orwell offers us threads of meaning, not comfort, but clarity. When Winston reflects on the woman in the yard, her powerful figure and coarse skin, he sees something eternal. That woman, perhaps nameless to the world, endures. She sings, she works, she gives life and carries burdens. In her, Orwell embeds a lesson about the strength of the ordinary. The party may arrest bodies and rewrite histories, but it cannot fully erase what it does not understand. The emotional endurance of such people, those who love without ideology, who sing without permission, remains a quiet form of resistance. The song she sang, absurd and sentimental, becomes almost sacred in its persistence. Its lyrics, once background noise, now linger with new weight. They sigh that time eals all things, but the smiles and the tears across the years, they twist my art strings yet. In a regime that insists on forgetting, even nostalgia becomes an act of rebellion. The human heart, Orwell seems to say, will remember long after the slogans fade. In this, we find another lesson, that memory is not just a passive act, it is a decision. To remember is to refuse the erasure imposed by oppression. To notice what the party tries to hide, beauty, love, pain, the past, is to assert that these things mattered and still matter. Winston's final thoughts in the chapter, as scattered and mundane as they seem, are not failures of resistance. They are its remnants. The very fact that his mind drifts to Charrington, to the singing woman, to the feeling of needing to relieve himself, is evidence that he is still thinking, still human, still alive in a way the party cannot entirely own. But Orwell never lets us forget the Watson. The physical pain inflicted on Julia is brutal and specific. The narrative lingers on her gasping for breath, her body folded unnaturally, her cheeks still marked with rouge. This is not just violence, it is desecration. It is the deliberate destruction of beauty and tenderness. Yet her smear of makeup, still clinging to her face, becomes a quiet monument, a fragile, fading symbol that she once chose to be seen, that she once lived, loved, and dared. Winston's paralysis in this moment is not weakness. It is what happens when all choices are stripped away. He does not resist because resistance has already been squeezed from him, not with fists, but with years of conditioning. The lesson here is not how he failed, but how systems of power succeed, not through strength, but through slow erosion. Orwell invites us to consider where in our own lives we have been taught not to act, where we have internalized rules, even unspoken ones, and stopped questioning why we follow them. This chapter, then, is not only the climax of Winston and Julia's story, it is a mirror, a reflection of how love, memory, and beauty are never truly safe in the hands of those who seek total control. But more importantly, it reminds us why they are worth protecting. Even in a world that watches every move, listens to every word, and punishes every affection, the human spirit searches for warmth. And in that search, we find the seed of hope, not because we are strong, but because we are aware. Perhaps the greatest tragedy Orwell depicts is not the loss of freedom, but the loss of belief that freedom can be reclaimed. And yet, by telling this story, by allowing us to feel the ache of what was destroyed, he ensures that we do not forget, that we carry Winston's awe at the blue sky, his reverence for the coral, his whisper of "she's beautiful" in our own memories. These small things become great things when we choose to notice them. So what do we carry away from this chapter? That vulnerability is not weakness, that to feel is not to fail, that even when systems crush individuals, the truth of their inner lives, their loves, their aches, their quiet moments of beauty can still reach others through stories, through memory, through care. Orwell's writing gently reminds us that as long as someone is left to tell the story, the spirit of resistance survives. Let us not wait for telescreens to remind us of what we cherish. Let us name beauty when we see it, sing songs even if they seem foolish, and choose to remember, not because we are rebellious, but because we are human. And in this remembering, perhaps, lies our salvation. As we close this chapter, we're left with a haunting question. If the past can be rewritten and language can be controlled, what remains of freedom? Orwell's vision is not just a warning about the future, it's a mirror for our present. If this analysis moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. And in the next video, we'll explore the final collapse of resistance, when love, identity, and even the self are broken by the ministry of love. Stay with us.